to the Plate Story Podcast. I'm Trista Polo from IWokeUpAwesome.com, and I am your host. In this podcast, we hear the fascinating stories behind vanity plates from around the country. We also get to know a little bit about the drivers behind those plates. Today's guest is Richard Pini. He's the co-creator of Elfquest. His license plate of the same name has been on his car for almost as long as the 40-year series has been on the shelves. I spotted it on Route 9 and connected with Richard through the official Elfquest Instagram account. I was excited to sit down and chat with Richard. He left a blue-chip career at IBM to bring the story of the Elfquest characters to the world with artist, storyteller, and spouse Wendy Pini. Let's go talk to Richard.
The concept is intriguing. No one else in the world has ever asked about the license plate. People have seen it, they've wondered about it, but no one is doing podcasts about license plates, and I look for them all the time. So this is a match made on Route 9.
It actually is a match made on Route 9. Now, how long have you had the license plate for?
We moved here over 40 years ago, and just saying that out loud makes me feel old, but I'm used to it. We moved here in 1979. I had a job at IBM at the time, which is what we're doing in Poughkeepsie, but we had already been doing Elfquest for maybe 2 years, and I don't know when I got the idea to look for an Elfquest license plate, but at some point it came to my attention that New York State, I think it's one of only 2 states in the country that will give you 8 alphanumeric characters for a vanity plate. And somewhere in my brain, the dime dropped, and I went, wait a minute, 8 letters, E-L-F-Q-U-E-S-T. I have to do this.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I never had a vanity plate before. But it just occurred to me, I just had to. And then I realized, wait a minute, we've been doing this for a year or 2. I wonder if anyone else might already have had the same idea that I was having.
Yeah, because when I saw it on Route 9, it could easily have been a fan. It never occurred to me that it was the creator of Elfquest.
Well,
how would that happen?
Well, this is where timing plays an important part, because a year or 2 after Elfquest started, of course the story had a lot of fans, but I don't think in the late 1970s, early 1980s, people were rushing to get vanity plates the way they rush to get prime high-level domains on the web. So before I applied to the DMV, I thought, if somebody has this plate before me, we are going to have a talk.
I'm going to call my FBI friends and see if they can get me the name and number.
No. I'm going to call my Italian friends and we'll have a conversation. But I applied for it and it came right through and I went, yay! And I have not let go of it. I'm going to be buried with an Elfquest vanity plate on my chest, I swear. But since then, a lot of fans have sent in their versions of Elfquest or Elfquest-related vanity plates.
You definitely seem to have a fan base that is, I think, more than loyal. It's like they seem to take on the Elfquest philosophies. They end posts on Facebook with, what's the phrase?
Oh, Shade and Sweetwater?
Shade and Sweetwater.
Well, that has become kind of a catchphrase. That was the phrase used almost from the beginning of Elfquest by the Sun Villagers when they would greet each other or say goodbye to each other, because in the desert, the notions of shade and sweet water would be very, very nice. It'd be, very friendly thing to say. So that, and I think that's up there with pucker nuts as a most used Elfquest phrase. It's kind of amazing to us. It's incredibly gratifying. We never set out to do anything more than tell the story that Wendy had been brewing all of her life and try to get it out to as many people as possible. And what we have gotten back through feedback over these years and decades has been wonderful and humbling and illuminating and transforming. And that's why I never thought of it at the time. I just wanted the Elfquest license plate. But wherever I or we go, mostly I'm the one driving the van. So I will use the first person singular, but it's really all about us.
Sure.
Wherever I drive, if I'm stopped at a light, I'm still not used to somebody pulling up in the lane alongside and honking and rolling down the window.
Yeah.
And I said, "Love your license plate. I've been reading it for years." I said, "Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're not a, stalker killer."
Well, I'm wondering, what do you think you would attribute their loyalty and their love so much of this world to?
The only analog that I can think of from the world of mainstream comics would be the X-Men from Marvel Comics during the years when Chris Claremont was writing it. This is a group of mutants, enhanced human beings with special powers, but because they are different, they are more often outcasts, looked upon as weird or freakish or a threat, than they are simply accepted. We were not doing Elfquest when that run was happening. At least I don't think the timelines overlap. I could be wrong. However, the reader response to the X-Men was, "We love this story because it's about a group of persecuted characters," and a lot of comics fans, a lot of science fiction fans, a lot of science fiction fantasy movie fans feel weird and different because of what they love. I mean, just think before it got big and huge and mega business, fans of science fiction, fantasy, and comics were looked down upon. They were the nerds. They were the geeks. They were the eggheads. They were the, you dismissed them. X-Men did that for mainstream comics. Elfquest seems to have done that for independent comics. No other title I can think of, which is not to say they aren't out there, but that I can think of sitting here right now, does that the way Elfquest does. We get on a regular basis communication from people who say, "Elfquest helped me find out or define or solidify in my own mind who I am." And that's really powerful.
That's huge.
Well, I don't know how huge it is. Star Wars is more huge, but it is just as powerful, I think.
Yeah, and when I say huge, I mean for the person.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a huge gift.
Absolutely. Every once in a while, somebody will come up, and this ruins us. It usually happens in person, and it will often happen at a convention where we're sitting behind a table. Somebody says, "Elfquest literally saved my life." And then they will tell us how, and just, how do you cannot do anything but accept that and give them a hug or just feel completely humbled. Because, as I said a few moments ago, we never set out to do that, but something, and I got to give 99.5% of the credit to Wendy for just coming up with the base story. Something touches that deep inside some people. And just sort of ricocheting off of that, occasionally I will, go somewhere and park I call it the Elfmobile, and I'll come out, and there'll be a note on the windshield that says, it's just hand ballpoint pen on whatever scrap of paper. My God, I love Elfquest. Thanks, great plate. But that's what it does.
Yeah.
That's what it does. Now, on the dark flip side of that, having a very recognizable vanity plate causes me to rein in certain forms of expressive road rage.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Well, it's got to be a good thing, because if I did sometimes the things that I think about, well, then all they have to do is remember the license plate, and somebody's going to track me down, and there will be, shall we say, consequences. So it has taught me a little life lesson in taking a deep breath and counting to 10 or 500 before acting.
Yeah, that's a good reason to have a vanity plate, right?
Yes.
Anger management.
Anger management, yes.
You decided to leave IBM to help to create Elfquest. What was the auspice for you? That's a big decision to make, to leave a paycheck and start an entrepreneurial kind of thing. Exactly
so. We moved up here in 1979, not to create Elfquest. Because Elfquest, the idea of it was born in 1977. Wendy, as I said, has had this general idea of a story about tribe, about family, about community. Mm. She's been telling that story in one form or another all her life. In the spring of 1977, two things happened in terms of pop culture. One, in April, a movie called Wizards appeared. Mm-hmm. And because we like animation, because this was fantasy, we went to see it. And we realized this is an animated cartoon quite unlike Disney. It was rough, it was grown up, it was a little bit nasty, but it told us you can do something. You don't have to do Disney, G-rated. The other thing that happened a month later was Star Wars. That hit like the proverbial blockbuster bombshell, and suddenly it was okay for all of us nerds, geeks, Buck Roger loving ne'er-do-wells. It was okay because everybody loved Star Wars.
Right.
Plus it was making a boatload of money. Those two things inspired Wendy to say to me, I've got this story. I'd like to try to get it out there somehow. She sat me down and she told me the skeleton. Mm-hmm. And I said, that sounds wonderful. How do we do it? Well, trying to make a movie as two 20-somethings, no, because movies take millions of dollars and hundreds of people.
Yeah.
We thought about writing a prose novel, but Wendy is such a wonderful, fantastic artist that with words only, all of that visual experience would be lost.
Yeah.
Will Eisner, I think it was, has famously said that comics are the melding of words and pictures, the perfect melding of words and pictures. And because we both were fans of comics at the time, I had been reading them for years, she had been reading them for years, we said, let's try to do a comic. Well, that's great, except neither one of us knows diddly about how to make a comic. She knows how to draw, but that's it. We began, this would have been late 1977, putting together the first issue of Elfquest. I didn't want to publish it. I went about looking for somebody to publish it, but no one was interested. So, long story short, the Little Red Hen, got to do it yourself if you want it done at all. I learned how to be a publisher.
This is before Google. How do you, and YouTube videos? How do you learn how to be a publisher?
How do you learn how to be a publisher? Well, first you realize that there are examples of not Marvel, not DC, not Archie comics out there, because years earlier, late 60s, the underground comics were flourishing. They had the same aspect as comic books. Their just content was quite different. Mm-hmm. In the earlier to mid-1970s, a couple of titles appeared that were not underground, but they were not mainstream, and the term ground level was coined, which then sort of morphed into independent. Mm-hmm. But there were a couple of titles. Bud Plant was publishing something called First Kingdom. Mike Friedrich was publishing Star Reach. I knew of these because, as I said, I was a kind of voracious comics fan. And I said, well, look, if we're going to make our own comics, let's use these as a model. Now, the one thing that was different was that the comics I used, they were magazine size, 8.5 by 11. Regular comics are something like 7 by 10.
Yeah.
They fit in spinner racks. They fit on pre-made shelf spaces. I used the bigger format as my example, which turned out to be a little bit of a blessing and then later on curse, but I took copies of those other independent comic books to a printer, which I found through the Yellow Pages, which was the manual Google
right, that's right.
of that era. And I said, can you do this? And how much will it cost to do this? And I got quotes, and I did my homework, and we began publishing Elfquest. And it took off.
Pretty much immediately?
Because Wendy was well known as an artist, a science fiction fantasy artist, before Elfquest, we had contacts in the comic book and art world, science fiction convention business. So we were able to hook up with a couple, back at that time I think there were only 2, distributors. Back in those days also, the direct market was just getting born and taking off. And this would become the network of comic shops, devoted comic shops that we have today.
Yeah.
So those 2 distributors took the entirety of our initial print run. We had a print run for the first issue of Elfquest of 10,000 copies. It just seemed like the number to do. Mm-hmm. Come to find out a little bit later that other people were doing independent comics, fanzines, and other similar sorts of things. And they were doing print runs of 100 or 500 or 250. These 2 distributors, Bud Plant and Phil Suling, took the entire print run of 10,000 copies and sold it out within, I think, 2 months. That was mind-blowing to us. So for the second issue, we printed 20,000. It sold out. The third issue, I think it was 40. I don't know why, but that thing that you referred to earlier, that it affects people. And remember, back then, it was purely word of mouth.
Yes.
Because even the fanzines in which you might get reviewed had 100, 200, 500 people for their circulation. So this was purely by word of mouth. And it must have been immense. It must have been awesome. We have to guess at that because now on social media you get immediate feedback and you get it in whatever quantity you're going to get it. Yeah. We would get letters sent to us on paper in envelopes with stamps from people saying how much they loved Elfquest. It was different. It was weird. It was hitting them deep. And so that's how we began to understand that somehow we'd caught lightning in a bottle. Now, this is all by way of coming back to IBM.
Yeah.
When Elfquest started, I was working another job, and that wasn't working out so well. It was kind of dead end. So a friend of mine who was already a college friend, who was already working here in Poughkeepsie at IBM, said, "Why don't you come up and apply for a job?" I said, "I don't know diddly squat about computers." I had gone to MIT, but I'm such a contrarian that while every other of the one of the 8,000 undergraduates was busily working with computers and punch cards and COBOL and Fortran, I said, "I don't want any part of this." So I never laid a finger on a computer. He said, "It doesn't matter. You're smart. They will teach you what you need to know, and they'll want you." I applied. I got 3 interviews. Surprised the heck out of me. I picked one of the jobs, and I went to work for IBM. And I was there for about 2 years. But Elfquest was already going, and it was growing. IBM was a wonderful job. It was intense. A lot of puzzle solving, coding, that sort of thing. And I love that kind of. You didn't put in 8-hour days there. You put in 9, you put in 10, you put in the time that it needed. Elfquest was growing. Wendy was doing the heavy lifting by drawing all this stuff, but I was taking care of the business. I was helping with some of the story. I was helping with editing. I was helping with a lot of the peripheral facilitating type tasks. And that took up whatever spare time there was.
Yeah.
I kind of was in the habit of enjoying some hours of sleep, and the math wasn't adding up. IBM wanted more time, Elfquest wanted more time, and I realized I had to make a choice. As you pointed out, having a job at IBM back in those days was blue chip. It was great benefits, the pay was wonderful, everything was good about it. If I was going to jump ship, then we were going to be on our own. Health insurance, we'd have to figure out what to do about that. It took the better part of a year to make the decision because I had to see enough growth in the sales of Elfquest. I had to see enough profit coming in so that I could rest easy at night, realizing if I quit IBM, we're not going to lose the house. We're not going to not eat. We're not going to, suffer. It took the better part of a year to make that decision, but the numbers worked.
Yeah.
And as I like to say, October 1981 was the last time I held a real job. Because ever since then, it's just been us running our own ship.
Yeah. And Wendy credits you with keeping Elfquest going all these years, no matter what, because of the publishing and all the different pieces you did.
Our skill sets dovetail nicely. She is a creative fireball. The vision that she has is unparalleled. I was able to get a job at IBM because I was left brain enough to pick up whatever tool set I needed to work at IBM. Here, as the president of Warp Graphics, I learned how to be a publisher. I learned how to be a bookkeeper. I learned how to be a printer. I learned how to be a manager. I learned how to be an agent. I learned how to be a marketer. And luckily, I'm also enough of a storyteller or an aficionado of good writing on my own that when we get together for story sessions, it is really lively and sparks fly. So I will take the credit for, yes, helping keep the ship afloat. Because there were times in the past 40 years when times got rough in comics.
Well, publishing even has changed so much over.
Publishing has changed, and you may remember that there were at least one or two times when, because of paper prices or some other factor, the cost of publishing, whether it was books or comics, kind of made some ventures not profitable anymore. Or, here's one example. It was early 1990s, and this was the time of the Gulf War. Bush Sr. was president. We had just come out with what I thought was going to be a best-selling crossover graphic novel, and I had shipped 100,000 copies to our distributors, Berkeley Books, Ace Books. This is not just comics now, we're in the book market. And within, I think, about a month of doing that, the political climate in the country shifted so radically that the economy got very, very worried, and distributors and big book publishers were shedding their unsold inventory because they didn't want all of that stuff that they'd paid for clogging up their cash flow. Well, when you're in the book market, books are returnable. And if they've paid you for books that they took and then they return them, you have to pay them back. So of that 100,000 copies, I think we got back 80,000, I had to pay back those advances. And that came about as close as anything ever has to fatally crippling what we were doing. But you make decisions, you make compromises, you take from Peter to pay Paul. I think at the time I took out a mortgage on, I refinanced the house, took the equity out, put it into the business so that we could stay afloat, and here we are.
So one of the things that I read is that you were one of very few, if any, maybe the first comic to be sold in bookstores. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Now, comics had been sold in bookstores long before Elfquest. They were sold in supermarkets. They were sold in drugstores. You had the spinner racks. Hey, kids, comics. And but I will say this, that Elfquest did do. In 1981, another publishing company came to us and said, we would like to collect the first 5 issues of Elfquest, have you color them, collect them into a book form, and see what we can do with that. We were fine with the idea, and that's when the first of 4 what I will call graphic novels, you can call them collections, compilations, I don't want to get hung up on the terminology, appeared. And because this publishing company had inroads to bookstores, mainstream bookstores, because they were publishing mainstream books, that first Elfquest volume went to Barnes & Noble. It went to Brentano's and Walden Books and Borders and probably a whole bunch of others that no longer exist.
Right.
Now, there had previous to that been collections of comics in mainstream bookstores. Marvel and DC would put together, the greatest Superman stories or the origins of Marvel Comics. But Elfquest was the first of its kind that was a complete story in one volume, in color, bound between covers. that went into Barnes & Noble and all those others. And again, just as happened with the comics, these books flew off the shelves, partly because back in those days, comic shops were growing across the country. The number was growing, but they weren't always, shall we say, family or female friendly. And a lot of women, readers, girls, women, weren't going into comic shops. But they were fine going into a Barnes & Noble. Mm. And here was this book on the shelf with Wendy's amazing artwork jumping out at them. And they bought the book. They never knew about the comics.
So you created a whole new audience.
It was a whole new audience. Yeah. And the word of mouth went out on that. So the second volume, we sold millions of those, literally. Wow. We sold millions. And I like, until somebody tells me I am full of wild blueberry muffins, I'm going to say that you go into a Barnes & Noble, you see those long shelves of graphic novels and manga. Elfquest was the key that opened that door. 30, almost 40 years ago. And that is one of the things I am most proud of. That we did that. Yeah. We didn't set out to do it. We never set out to do anything in particular except tell this story, which is very, very near and dear to us. But apparently, just doing that seems to have had ripple effects far beyond what we imagined. Including
adding you to the Hall of Fame this past year.
Eisner Hall of Fame. This is an honor that we never expected, anticipated, really even dreamed of. The Eisner Awards are given out every year in the summertime by Comic-Con internationally.
Like the Oscars for comics.
They are the Oscars for comics, exactly so. And we always kind of wondered why Elfquest never made it into the Oscar category, the Eisner Awards. And somebody explained it to us that Elfquest is so big and sprawling and continuous that unlike a movie that comes out at a particular time in a particular year, you can't really categorize it. Okay, it's hard to swallow, but it's acceptable. This past year, 2019, we were invited to Comic-Con. We've been invited several times in the past. We thought, okay, that's cool. It happened to be San Diego's 50th Comic-Con, and we had been going there almost from the beginning. So the rationale that we were given for their inviting us was, you've been with us for so long, your family, we want you here. Twist my arm. But then the organizer of the Eisner Awards said, we would like you to attend. I said, okay, that's fine. I'm not doing anything that Friday night. And we sat there, and they put us at one of the front tables. Okay. We knew by then we were nominated for inclusion into the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame is like the Lifetime Achievement Oscar. All right. I mean, everybody who's nominated gets to sit up close. Yeah. We're sitting there, and we're watching the awards happen, and it comes down to the Hall of Fame. And there are already some people who are automatically inducted because their careers are just so unmistakably stellar, you cannot not do that.
But you don't think yours is one of those?
We knew we had done some amazing things. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
False modesty is not my forte. As Isaac Asimov once said, and I heard him, and you have to hear it in Isaac Asimov's wonderful Yiddish cant. He said, "You want for the sake of modesty I should lie?" We knew we had done some amazing things, but we were up against like a dozen people or couples or groups whose accomplishments were easily the equivalent of ours in significance, just in other areas. So it was one of those. The year before, a book that I wrote about Wendy's art and life had been nominated for an Eisner, and it didn't win. But you know how in the Oscars they say, "Oh, just to be nominated," and you think to yourself, you're saying that, but you don't really mean it. Well, I learned it's true. I learned you can say it and have it be true, because we were in a room with all sorts of talent. And I said, I'll lose to him, I'll lose to her, no problem. So we thought, we've already been a bridesmaid, but not a bride. I can live with it happening again. So there were 4 or 5 of them, and the first one got called up, and the second one got called up, and the third one got called up. And I remember sitting back and just saying, okay, this dinner was all right. And our very good friend Sergio Aragones, who's a wonderful artist, a caricaturist, he did all the little marginalia notes in Mad Magazine, chuckled and said, "Oh, we have a couple." And I said, "Okay, if they over there get it, they earned it. They've been doing this longer than we have." And he said our names. And one of the few times in my life, I fell out of my chair, almost. Wendy's face was, I wish I had a video camera, for her jaw dropped. Yeah. And we stumbled on up a stairs. I was very grateful for the handrail because my head was literally spinning. We found out later, a lot of people knew, but they weren't telling us, and they should. We found out later that if we had been looking in a certain direction, we could have seen the monitor announcing the upcoming names. But we were just looking at Sergio because he's our friend, and we got up there, and it's still, that moment still lives with me. And once something like that happens, you realize you're not going to stop working. You're not going to stop doing your best. You're not going to stop striving. Yeah. But that little piece of you that was kind of hanging on, am I ever going to get this or that award, just evaporates. And you don't realize how much that little part has been with you until it's gone.
Wow. And
I think everybody thinks, am I going to make it this year?
So what has replaced that?
A kind of calmness. As I said, we've still got projects that we're working on. We've still got irons in the fire. We still have goals that we would very much like to achieve in the next months and years. But once you got the little statue, you can always look at it and say, there was that moment. And all those, at that time, 40 plus years, somebody is saying, you did good. We tell ourselves we do good all the time, and that's a good thing. Yeah. It's not false pride. But when it comes from outside, there's just a little extra spoonful of sugar there. Absolutely. That you can look at things differently from that point on.
Mm-hmm. So are you willing to share some of the goals and things that are coming up in the future?
Oh, well, heavens. 2018 was the culmination of a 40-year story arc that began in February of 1978 and concluded in February of 2018.
On the same day, right?
40 years to the exact day.
Yep.
We had to pull some scheduling strings to make that happen. But when the possibility arose, I said, "There's no way we're not taking advantage." Yeah. So, and that was a major accomplishment in itself. We always knew that there were more stories to be told. In particular, the one that Wendy and I are working on now. It's called Elfquest Stargazers Hunt, and it takes the second most popular or most important character, because his story was not complete at the end of the big story. So this is like a coda to a musical piece. It continues directly from the events that concluded in Final Quest in 2018. And we're doing that. Wendy is, again, doing very heavy lifting. She has a wonderful assistant. His name is Sonny Strait. He apprenticed with her for a couple of years. He is the only one in the world to pick up and be able to work with her over her layouts and capture her style, but add an entire new lively sensibility of his own. So the first two issues of that are out. We've got to finish that. There's the ever ongoing quest to see whether or not Elfquest can be transformed for the large or the small screen. For years, we've wanted to see an Elfquest movie. Lately, we've been wondering, maybe Elfquest, because it's so big and so sprawling, maybe it needs a long-form series like Game of Thrones instead of a movie where you get one shot.
Yeah.
And how do you compress 40 years into 90 minutes? No, you don't. That's ongoing. Wendy is, some years ago, she has always loved Edgar Allan Poe, and she has particularly loved his short story, The Mask of the Red Death. It's only 8 pages long. It has one named character. She looked at that story and said, what has to happen to a person's soul that when all of his fellows are dying, he takes his friends and locks himself in a castle and parties? What kind of a person do you have to be to do that? So she took that notion and developed it into a 400-page futuristic, sexy, hard R, maybe more rated graphic novel. We thought that might be the end of it, but she also loves musical theater. And she has adapted Mask of the Red Death, her version, for musical theater a la Phantom of the Opera or Sweeney Todd. She is working with people out on the West Coast to see if that can get off the ground. She said to me first, and then she has said it publicly, that after many, many, many years of telling the stories of all of these wonderfully enlightened and generous and kind characters, all of her dark energy was becoming bottled up. She said, I had to let it out or it was going to explode. So all of that other energy went into the telling of Mask of the Red Death, which she says is all about people behaving badly toward each other, whereas Elfquest is all about be as kind as you can to each other.
What inspires you most about Wendy?
Oh, my. Have you got a couple of hours? No, it's really simple. We are human. We have our tics, our idiosyncrasies, and our flaws. But there is in her an innate there's not a single word for it, lightness, a kindness, an energy that is unlike any I've ever encountered in any other person. I think that because it's coupled with the desire and the ability to get it out of here, inside, internal, and put it into such beautiful imagery. A lot of people are beautiful on the inside. What they do shows that. Sometimes what they do is subtle, and you don't see it easily, or you don't see it all at once. When she creates this imagery, it's unmistakable, it's undeniable. For someone like me, and I suspect for all the fans who just react so strongly to her artwork, it's that manifestation that makes it so easy. It's such an easy first step to get inside that kindness and inside that sense of balance and even justice. So it's that combination, I think, that is the most inspiring. That I have been lucky enough to, as I said earlier, have some skills that complement what she can do, gives me a great sense of fulfillment. Not to say we don't butt heads. Not to say that she doesn't have a temper sometimes, although as we get out of our late adolescence and into our early golden youth, we are getting more and more mellow. Mm-hmm. But that center that she has is constant.
What would you say inspires her most about you?
Lord, we did another interview not very long ago for a comics magazine. And the interviewer, who is a good interviewer, and you are a good interviewer,
thank you,
asked a very similar pair of questions. And I'm trying to remember what it was that she said, because I need the crib notes. I can't say for certainty what she would say. A quality that I do have that I am willing to believe that she admires is, you give me a problem and I'll find a way to solve it. Whether it's technical or creative or psychological, although that's slippery. It's why they hired me at IBM. If there's something that needs doing, I'll somehow suss what it is, and then I'll suss how to do it. And I don't need instructions, and I don't need to be told to do it. It's just a thing within me. Like she has got to tell stories, I have got to facilitate. Wendy has said, you need business cards that have, writer, editor, facilitator on them. It's a skill that I seem to have. I don't know where it's from. Maybe it's a gift like being able to draw wonderful artwork. But facilitation, I think, is what she tells me she very often likes seeing in action.
It's probably a very good partner to her creativity?
Yeah. We sometimes play what if. What if we had never met? Mm. And our meeting was improbable as all get out. She was in California. I was in Boston at a time when there was no internet, there was no social media, there was nothing but letters with stamps and telephones that you, at least in a dormitory, you had to feed with quarters.
Yeah.
Would she still be back in California? Would she still be doing science fiction conventions and doing artwork? Would she be working for some magazine? Would I still be working for IBM? Would I have even gotten into IBM? What would I be doing today? What would she be doing today? And I can't begin to imagine, because the sequence of events that has led not only just to Elfquest, but mainly Elfquest, is so much now ingrained into my DNA, creatively, philosophically, spiritually, that I cannot imagine what I would be doing if that had never happened, or if it went away. I think if it went away for some cosmically awful reason, I'm old enough and skilled enough that I'll figure out a way to live the rest of my life. But had it never happened in the first place, I don't have that much imagination.
I wonder if you've said a few times that it really was a story from Wendy's self, that it needed to be told to be out of her. And I wonder if it could have really turned into what it is if not for the two of you and what you both bring to the table. What do you think about that?
I agree. The reason that the story comes from Wendy, and this is no secret, she was adopted into a difficult family situation. There was not a lot of love there, so from an early age, what drove her was the quest for friendship, the quest for community, the quest for family, for real loving family, the quest for tribe. She wrote and or drew a lot of stories prior to Elfquest, but they were all about individuals or groups that were outcasts, looking to find a safe place to live, or looking to find others of their own kind, looking to find community. So Elfquest was the grand crystallization of all of those inner impulses that she'd been feeling almost from the day that she was brought home. What she would have done with that, I don't know. And I don't know if you were to ask her that question, what she would answer. But because I had been something of a facilitator all my life prior even to meeting her, figuring out puzzles, finding ways to do things that people said you can't do or you're not supposed to do. When she sat me down on that couch in spring of 1977 and said, I have this idea, my mind went into facilitator mode.
How do we make that happen?
How do we make that happen? There's got to be a solution, and if this particular solution didn't work, well, all right, let's drop back 5 yards and punt, and let's see if there's a plan B or plan C. And that's been the story for...
So I have this curiosity about the whole 40-year thing with Elfquest. What keeps you both, and obviously you can speak for yourself, but maybe you've had these conversations Did you ever think, let's just put these people to bed, these elves, this world? We've told every story there is to tell. How much more of this world do we really want to live in? What keeps you excited about the Elfquest world?
That's an excellent question. If Wendy were here, she would jump in and say, I got my fulfillment with the wrap-up of the final quest.
Yeah.
As I said, the story we're working on right now is a coda. It's an epilogue. There are plenty more stories because this world extends backward and into the future in time. But to finish Final Quest, Wendy pushed herself. And she worked long hours for long weeks, long months, and it took its toll. And when she was done, she said, I don't ever want to be beholden to a deadline again. And for all of 2018, we were busy celebrating. We went to a lot of shows. We signed a lot of comics and books. But always in the back, we knew, because the idea for this epilogue had been around for years and years, we knew that one more time we got to put on the flak jacket and do this. You're right, she and I have had conversations about this. She is not working nearly as hard on this because she has the assistance of Sunny Strait working over her layouts, finishing the art and doing the coloring. There are still deadlines because we're publishing through Dark Horse Comics and they want a bi-monthly book. And we want a bi-monthly book because if you let it go any longer than that, people's memories are very, very short. But she has said, this is, again, more work than she really wanted to think about doing, at least so soon after Elfquest was done, that it's difficult. What keeps the excitement about it is that the 40-year saga was essentially the story arc, the hero's journey of Cutter, chief of the Wolf Riders. And that was Wendy's character. People over the years have said, oh, Cutter and Lita, that must be you two. No, it's too easy. Cutter is Wendy, the leader, the visionary. I'm Skywise, the sidekick, the facilitator, the wise ass. I said earlier that Cutter's story was done, but Skywise's, I didn't name them, I think, but it's Skywise's story that needs resolution now. And it's not going to take another 40 years.
Right.
We're going to do it in 8...
I hope not.
We're going to do it in 8 issues. It's going to take about a year and a half.
Okay.
These are very, very personal stories. So we have to be as deeply involved with the creation of them as we can be. If who or whatever were to come down through the ceiling and say, I'll let you finish Stargazer's hunt, but then you're coming home, I'd say, all right, there's a lot, that I won't have done, but I will have done this. And I can go off stage feeling that I, as a part of we, have accomplished something really, really good.
So if Elfquest is ever put up on a shelf or it's done in a way you don't need to be involved, what do you see your retirement looking like?
What do you mean, this word retirement?
Oh, are you on the work till you drop retirement plan like other people?
I don't see my desire to facilitate, to solve things, flickering.
Yeah.
It might be more or less easy. But I don't know. I just get great joy out of helping things happen. So I think I'm going to be doing that to the extent I can for as long as I can.
Could you ever see yourself helping other people who want to get started in this sort of a business or venture as something that you would want to spend time doing?
That's a good question. because that gets into the notion maybe of mentoring. Over the years, people have asked me, how do you do this? I want to do this. I don't know what steps to take. And I have, as far as I can remember, always been very, very free in telling. There's no payoff to keeping information like that a secret.
Yeah.
We both love to see other people express their creativity to succeed.
Yeah.
The market is crazy, but there's room. Last year, is it last year? No, it was 2018. It's still last year. It's functionally 2019 for me. I haven't gotten into January yet. We were at a show in Denver called DINK. It's Denver Independent Comics. It's an independent comic show in Denver. And we were there sort of as the elder statespeople of independent comics.
Yeah.
And that was source of some amusement. But when we weren't talking, we were in a room, an exhibition hall, that was full of tables that were full of kids. It's the only way somebody from where I'm sitting can say it. These young kids, full of beans and vinegar, they were putting out there. I'd never seen so many independent comics in one place in my life. And I couldn't begin to imagine how they were doing it. I couldn't begin to imagine what thoughts they were having, what problems they were solving, what emotions they might be feeling from one day or week or month to the next as they worked to get their stuff out there. But there was a room full of this stuff. They're doing it. They have questions. Wherever they're getting their questions answered, they're getting them answered. If anyone turns to me and says, can you give me some thought about how to do this? Right now, I would say, listen, when we started, it was a very different world. My problems were very different from yours. My solutions were very different from what yours will be. But here's the thought I put into it. And if you can modify that for today's world, as opposed to the world of 40 plus years ago, I'm happy to help you. Mm. And everybody comes with different questions, and everybody gets a different answer. It's my best answer. Now, as far as mentoring, I don't know if I am cut out for that. Mentoring is, in my view of it, a long-term kind of thing. I'm not saying I couldn't, but since you've pinned me to the wall, I think that my help is more easily given if you come to me and say, I got a problem. Okay, let's work on it. And you
like,
go
here's
away.
A specific thing.
Here's a specific thing.
Challenged by, what would you do?
And I give you that answer, and you go away, and later you say, I tried this, and this part worked, and this part didn't work. What next? And I can look at it and say, all right, why didn't this part work? Let's try this. And you go, you try it again.
The title of this book is called, If a Facilitator Tried to Be a Mentor.
I think it would be a very thin book if I were writing it.
Well, do you have any, based on the questions you might have gotten most recently, do you have any advice for?
We have been asked that question a lot. We do a lot of shows. We do panels. There's question and answer. Kids come up to us at our table, and they ask that question or variations on that question quite often. Wendy will often say to them, get internet and digital savvy. Her learning path has been from pencil and then ink and then color, all the way on up through digital art. And that's her path. That's how she has adapted to the needs of the digital world. It is absolutely essential, necessary, although we know many, many wonderful artists who don't. They work with pencil, they work with ink, they work with paint. Their channels, from putting the work, from manifesting the work, to getting it out there, are their channels. Wendy's channel is her channel. My advice is a little bit more bedrock than that. In all the years I've been doing this, I've had a lot of young people, and a few of a certain age, come up to me and say, I've got this idea. And I say, show it to me. And they say, oh, I haven't written it or drawn it yet. And I say, then get thee hence and manifest it. I don't care if it's words, pictures, or both, or sculpture, or whatever. You come up to me and say, I've got an idea. I'm going to say to you, I have no way to read your mind. And then you're going to say to me, well, let me tell you. And I'm going to say to you, no. Because I don't have the time or the interest in having you sit at my table and ramble for however long you're going to do it. Because nobody in this business, nobody in the production end of this business, and production is manifestation all the way through distribution, has the time for that. You may spin a wonderful story, but then what? I can't capture your words in the air. They might say, oh, well, can you write it for me and I'll split the profits with you? No, I don't have the time for that. I don't have the desire for that. If you have an idea, you must manifest it. However you do it doesn't matter. That you do it is all that matters. Because then we have something common, it's sitting on the table between us, to talk about. I can look at your drawings then, and I can say to you, this is wonderful, or this needs work, or maybe you grab me with something I see and I ask you a question, where did that come from? And maybe that leads us, or you, down a path. But you got to manifest it first. That's my advice.
Great advice. Now, I have to ask this, because, so please forgive me, but a friend of mine, she's been a writer for comic companies. She's a teen fantasy writer.
Okay. And
I contacted her and I said, I'm going to be meeting with Richard. What would you ask him? And such a weird thing she brings up. She said, well, I used to read this comic called, let me make sure I have it, Xenophile, with 3 X's.
Phil Folio did that.
And they did a parody. They did a parody of Elfquest in, I think, one of the characters in one of their episodes, in one of their issues.
I did not know that. Now I'm going to have to look for that. I know because Phil Folio did work for us way back in the day.
Okay.
And he has gone on to more and better and bigger things.
Yeah.
But I know he did this, and it's got his brand of humor and wit is unique, so that's stamped all over the comic. I know of the comic. I did not know that there was, I will call it a tip of the hat, because sometimes, homage is a little bit too noble for some of the things that we have seen over the years.
Yeah. Well, I noticed it wasn't in the list of homages you have on the website.
Only because I'm not aware of it.
Right.
If I find it, or if you find it and you tell me about it, I will include it.
I will, and I will send it to you. So I'm not familiar enough with the characters to be absolutely certain of the name. Is there a character that is in your stories that only has the ability to procreate after winning or losing a battle? Is that one of your characters?
Not necessarily one of our characters,
okay.
But this makes reference, at least it suggests to me, what we call infamous orgy scene in original Elfquest issue number 17.
Okay.
The Wolf Riders are seeking their ancestral home. They meet up with a very scrappy group of characters called the Go-Backs. The next day, they're going to have to battle through a mountain full of trolls, and these are nasty guys, to achieve their home, their ancestral palace. And so they know, all of them know, that tomorrow they're going into battle, and none of them may come back. Some of them, but not all of them, are going to come back. So the night before, it's partay, and no holds barred, and anything goes. Very tastefully done.
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing it for two reasons. One, hey, let's have some fun because we die tomorrow. And two, because it's very difficult for the elves to have children.
Mm.
The more you make whoopee, the better your chances are of at least trying to replace those who are going to die.
Yeah.
The lead character of the Go-Backs is a wonderful character called Kavi. And that's the only echo, faint bell that what you just described and what I know of the story might have in common.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely find out from her. I'm impressed that you remember so clearly a specific scene, what issue it was in. Granted, you're a co-creator. This is your work. But that's pretty impressive. Do you remember every story, every character, every plot line?
Not to put too fine a point on it, hell no. But because this is the big air quotes infamous orgy scene,
comes up a lot.
Pun may be intended. I don't know.
Not, but I'll take it.
No. There are fans out there, and there are lovely people, and they know the cast of characters and situations in far greater detail than Wendy or I ever could or will.
Well, and I think that makes sense, right? Because you put it out, and it leaves you and goes out into the world, whereas they consume it, and so they take it in and hold it dear.
Of course.
So that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, just as it makes sense for one of them to make a comment or come up at a convention and say, I don't know if you'll remember me. We met at a convention 10 years ago. Okay, how many of us have you met? How many of you have we met?
Yeah.
On the other hand, that facilitational left brain thing that I seem to have, for a long time, we did subscriptions. And we had a mailing list of about 5,000.
Oh, okay.
And every so often, when a new issue came out, I printed out 5,000 labels. I had 5,000 envelopes printed up, and I stuffed 5,000 envelopes and sent them out.
Personally?
Personally.
Facilitating.
Well, yeah. It was far easier to just sit down for a couple of nights, watch whatever was on the TV, instead of hiring, and it was, it was easy to do. Yeah. But because I maintained that mailing list, I still remember when somebody comes up and says, I was on the mailing list. What's your name? John Doe, Jane Doe. Oh, yeah, you were in Minneapolis, right? And their eyes will get big. And
yeah.
Say, how do you know that? It's just...
Stuffed a lot of envelopes.
I stuffed a lot of envelopes over those years.
Well, that's everything that I wanted to ask. Do you have anything that you feel like we didn't cover that you want to make sure we get in there?
I've had a wonderful time just sitting here schmoozing.
Good, me too.
I can't think of a thing. I mean, these questions have all been real good. So yeah, fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Trista's Plate Story podcast. You can meet the entire Elfquest cast of characters and find out where Richard and Wendy will be next by visiting their website at elfquest.com. If you would like to nominate the owner of a license plate, including you, or visit any of our sponsors and partners, come see us at platestory.com. That's PL8STORY.com and give us the details. I'm Trista Polo, wishing you well on the road to your next adventure.